In the misty woods of Oregon, a grieving man thought he'd found peace in an old abandoned house. But what his German shepherd uncovered beneath the floor changed everything. Buried bones, a mother's desperate message from beyond the grave, and a secret powerful men tried to erase for decades. As truth rises from the darkness, faith is tested, forgiveness is born, and a miracle begins to shine through the cold walls of that forgotten home. If you believe that God still reveals the truth in His time, don't scroll away. Hit subscribe, share, and comment Amen to spread this story of faith, justice, and divine redemption. May the Lord bless everyone watching. The small town of Silver Pines lay in the misty foothills of Oregon, where the mornings smelled of wet pine and rusted metal, and the evenings sank into a quiet so heavy it could crush a man's thoughts. A pale sun struggled to break through the clouds that day when Jack Turner arrived at his new home. A weather-beaten two-story farmhouse with chipped white paint, sagging porch rails, and a yard filled with wild grass taller than his knees. The house sat alone at the edge of a forest, its silence almost expectant, as if it had been waiting for someone to disturb it again. Jack, a man of 42, broad-shouldered but lean, with graying stubble tracing the edge of his jaw, stepped out of his truck. His dark hair was speckled with silver, and the deep lines around his blue-gray eyes told of nights spent awake longer than he wanted to admit. A faint scar crossed the bridge of his nose, an old memory from his days as a detective in Portland, back when life had purpose and noise. Losing his wife, Claire, 3 years earlier in a car crash had hollowed something inside him. Since then, the city had become unbearable. Every sound reminded him of her laughter that was no longer there. He thought the countryside might help him breathe again. Rex leaped down from the passenger seat, his paws crunching against the gravel. The German shepherd was 6 years old, large and muscular, with a thick sable coat that shimmered even under the dull sun. His eyes were sharp amber, always scanning, always alert. The eyes of a creature that had seen more than most humans. Rex had been Jack's partner back in the force, trained in tracking and search operations. When Jack retired, Rex retired too. They had saved each other in more ways than one. Jack unlocked the front door, which groaned as it opened. Dust floated through the slanted beams of sunlight. The air was heavy with age and mildew. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kane, had passed away months ago, leaving the property at a bargain price that no one seemed eager to claim. Jack didn't mind the smell or the creaks. It felt honest, in a strange way. Something broken could always be fixed. By afternoon, he had set up the bare essentials: a mattress in the living room, a kettle, and a single lamp that flickered whenever the wind picked up. Rex explored every corner, sniffing the floorboards, pausing now and then to stare at the ground as if something underneath it disturbed him. Jack laughed softly. "Relax, buddy. Probably just mice," he said, though his voice didn't sound as certain as he hoped. Night came quickly in Silver Pines. The temperature dropped, and the wind moaned through the pines like a restless soul. Jack sat by the window, sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug, staring out into the fog that wrapped the forest in a ghostly veil. Rex lay beside him, ears twitching. Then came the noise, a faint, metallic clink from beneath the floorboards. Rex's head snapped up, growling low. Another sound followed, like something scraping against wood. Jack froze. "Probably the pipes," he muttered, though there were no working pipes in that part of the house. Rex stood, his hackles rising, and barked, deep, guttural barks that echoed through the empty rooms. Jack grabbed his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. "Easy, boy," he whispered as he knelt, pressing his palm to the old wood. The boards were cold, and beneath them came another sound. One short, sharp clang followed by silence. Jack waited, heart hammering, but nothing else came. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "We'll deal with it in the morning," he said, though both he and Rex stayed alert through the night. The following morning was gray and damp. Jack decided to inspect the floor where the noise had come from. The wood in that area looked darker, softer, almost as if it had been waterlogged years ago. He fetched a crowbar from his truck, pried at one of the boards, and immediately smelled something faintly metallic and earthy. The plank gave way with a crack, and a cloud of stale air rose up. Rex leaned in, whining softly. Jack shone the flashlight inside. At first he saw only soil and fragments of rotted wood, but then the beam caught on something pale. He brushed the dirt away, his breath slowing. A bone. Not animal, too thick, too human. He froze. His mind, trained to analyze before reacting, told him to stay calm. He dug further, hands trembling, and uncovered more bones, small, brittle, arranged in a way that made his stomach twist. Beside them lay a rusted object glinting faintly in the light. Jack lifted it, a ring, corroded with age but still bearing the faint engraving of initials. SM. He sat back, staring at the small grave under his house. The silence pressed in, broken only by Rex's low whimper. "Jesus," he whispered. His first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped him. The way the bones were buried, the ring deliberately placed, it didn't feel random. Someone had meant for this to be hidden, not found, and now he was the one standing over it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat outside on the porch, listening to the distant calls of owls and the whisper of the trees. Rex rested his head on Jack's knee. "What do you think happened here, boy?" Jack asked softly. The dog's ears twitched, eyes fixed on the dark outline of the house. Jack sighed. He had come to escape the ghosts of his past, but it seemed he had only traded them for new ones. He thought of Claire, how she used to tell him he couldn't live without chasing answers. "You're not happy unless you're fixing something broken," she'd say, smiling. Maybe she was right. Jack looked back at the old house, its windows reflecting the pale moonlight like tired eyes. Somewhere beneath that floor lay a story someone had tried to bury decades ago. And he wasn't the kind of man to leave a story unfinished. The wind howled again, and for a brief second, Jack thought he heard a whisper coming from inside the house. It wasn't words, just a sound, like breath caught in the walls. Rex growled softly, tail stiff. Jack stood, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Tomorrow," he murmured. "We start digging tomorrow." The house loomed behind him, silent, patient, waiting for the truth to be unearthed. The next morning broke under a low sky, heavy with rain. Silver pines seemed smaller under the drizzle, the trees bending as if trying to hide something from sight. Jack Turner tightened his jacket and stepped onto the creaking porch. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, sharp and cold. Rex padded beside him, shaking droplets from his fur. The discovery under the floorboards had kept Jack awake most of the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that ring glinting beneath the flashlight. He needed answers. He couldn't move into this house without knowing whose bones lay beneath it. He decided to start by fixing the damaged floor. The storm had weakened the boards even further, and if he didn't repair them, he risked more of the structure collapsing. As he pried up another section of flooring near where the remains had been found, the crowbar struck something hollow. The sound was distinct. Wood on metal, not dirt. He crouched, pressing his ear closer. Rex sniffed the spot, tail stiff, ears pointed. "You hear it too, huh?" Jack whispered. He dug carefully, scraping away years of dust and soil until he exposed what looked like a wooden hatch, sealed shut by rusted nails and hidden under layers of grime. It wasn't part of the house's blueprints. He had checked those the night before. Someone had gone to great effort to conceal it. It took nearly an hour to pry it open. The hinges screamed as stale air wafted up, a mix of mold, iron, and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten. Jack shone his flashlight down. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. "Stay," he told Rex. But the dog ignored him and followed as always. The stairs creaked under their weight. At the bottom lay a cramped cellar, barely large enough for two men to stand. Old paint peeled from the stone walls, and puddles reflected the beam of light. In one corner stood a small wooden box, warped and blackened by moisture. Jack knelt and brushed the dirt away. Inside was a single object, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and edges curled. The name Sarah Miller was etched faintly on the first page. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written by a woman in fear. Jack flipped through the entries, reading fragmented lines. "He watches from the trees. I hear his boots at night. I told them, but no one believed me. I must hide the truth before he comes for us." The last entry was smudged with something dark, perhaps blood or ink. It ended abruptly with the words, "If someone finds this, don't trust the man in the woods." Jack felt the air grow colder. He could almost hear her voice whispering through the words. Sarah Miller. She must have been the woman who once owned the ring. He had to know who she was and what had happened here. He climbed out of the cellar and spent the next hours researching at Silver Pines Town Hall. The building was small, an old brick structure with yellowing portraits of former mayors hanging crookedly on the walls. The clerk on duty was a thin, balding man named Harold Briggs, probably in his late 50s. His gray mustache twitched when he spoke, and his glasses constantly slipped down his nose. He greeted Jack politely but warily, as if he had already guessed what Jack was looking for. Jack showed his badge. He still carried his retired detective ID and said, "I'm just trying to learn about the previous owners of my property, the Miller family." The clerk frowned, typing slowly on his ancient computer. "That house?" he said softly. "Most folks don't buy that one. Thought it'd stay empty forever." He handed over a thin file. "Last registered owners, Thomas and Sarah Miller. Purchased in 1985, declared missing in 1991. Case closed due to insufficient evidence." Jack flipped through the file. The photographs were old. Sarah, a woman in her mid-30s, tall and slender with long auburn hair tied back neatly, stood beside a man presumed to be her husband, Thomas, who had a heavy frame, short beard, and dark eyes that seemed distant even in still image. A little girl, about 5 years old, smiled between them. "They just disappeared?" Jack asked. Harold hesitated. "That's what the report says. Some say they moved. Others, well, folks talk." He lowered his voice. "There was a story about a man who worked near those woods back then. A drifter. But that was never proven. Sarah went to the sheriff before she vanished. Said someone was following her. Sheriff didn't believe her." Jack's instincts buzzed. He asked, "Who was the sheriff then?" Harold sighed. "Dan Mullins, retired. Lives on the east side near the old sawmill. But he doesn't talk about that case. None of us do." There are things in this town better left buried. The way Harold's eyes darted toward the window made Jack uneasy. On his way out, a frail voice called from behind him. Sitting on a bench near the entrance was an elderly woman bundled in a faded wool coat. Her silver hair was thin, and her hands trembled as she clutched a cloth bag. "You bought the Miller house, didn't you?" she asked. Her name was Evelyn Hart, once a neighbor to the Millers. Her face was lined, but her eyes, pale green and sharp, still carried a spark of memory. Jack nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Do you remember them?" Evelyn smiled sadly. Sarah was kind, always baking pies for the neighbors. Her husband, he was quiet, too quiet. I remember the night she came to my door, crying. She said she heard footsteps outside her window, saw someone standing near the trees. I told her to call the police, but she said she already had. Nobody came. Evelyn's gaze turned distant. A week later, they were gone. Some things should stay buried, Mr. Turner. Not all truths set you free. Jack thanked her and walked back through the rain. As he reached his truck, Rex barked softly, ears flattened. Jack looked toward the tree line where the fog thickened. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move, tall, human, watching. Then it was gone. He placed his hand on Rex's head. "We're in it now, boy," he said quietly. "Let's find out what they buried down there." The storm had passed, leaving silver pines soaked and heavy with mist. The air carried the sharp scent of pine and damp earth as Jack Turner stepped out onto his porch, the weight of yesterday's discovery pressing on his mind. The journal of Sarah Miller had vanished overnight. He had locked it inside his desk before going to bed, yet this morning the drawer was open, the lock broken clean off. Rex prowled around the house, nose low to the ground, growling softly. The back door bore the marks of forced entry, scratches, fresh splinters, and a muddy boot print that led out toward the forest. Whoever had come wasn't a random thief. They had taken only the journal. Jack crouched, running his fingers through the dirt near the threshold, noting the deep impressions of heavy boots. "They knew what they were after," he muttered. Rex whined in agreement, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the woods behind the property. Jack had seen enough investigations to know fear was useless. What mattered was evidence. He slung his old leather jacket over his shoulder, grabbed his flashlight and camera, and followed Rex into the trees. The forest stretched wide and silent, except for the soft drip of rain from the branches. The deeper they went, the thicker the mist became, curling around them like pale smoke. Rex's pace quickened. His keen nose picked up a trail, tail swinging like a compass needle. Jack followed until the dog stopped abruptly near a cluster of ferns. Beneath them, half buried in mud, lay the outline of a wooden structure. It was an old hunting cabin, the kind built decades ago by loggers. The walls were gray with rot, the roof sagged inward, and ivy crawled up one side like veins. Jack pushed open the warped door. It gave way with a groan. Inside, dust hung in the air like ash. Broken furniture, a rusted lantern, and fragments of shattered glass covered the floor. But what caught his attention was the wall, a faded patch where something had once been scraped away, leaving behind streaks of dark brown. He leaned closer. Blood. Old, but real. Rex sniffed the base of the wall and pawed at a corner of the floor. Jack knelt, brushing aside leaves and dirt until his fingers found something stiff, a piece of paper sealed between two boards. Carefully, he slid it out. It was a photograph, half torn, the edges yellowed. It showed Sarah Miller, her auburn hair pinned neatly back, smiling beside a small girl with soft curls and bright eyes. The right half of the picture was missing, torn cleanly away. Someone had wanted to erase someone else from that memory. Jack felt a chill run through him. A noise outside made him freeze. Twigs snapped. He switched off the flashlight and waited. Through the cracked window, he saw movement. A silhouette near the trees. Tall, still, watching. Jack's instincts flared. He reached for the small revolver he still carried, but when he stepped outside, the figure was gone. Only the faint echo of footsteps fading, deeper into the woods, remained. Rex barked furiously, straining at his leash, but Jack held him back. "Not now, boy. We'll find them soon enough." By the time he returned home, the sky had turned copper with evening light. The broken lock on his desk mocked him. He searched the entire house for any clue left behind by the intruder. Under the table near the fireplace, he found a cigarette butt, half-smoked, with a faded brand mark. Raven's Edge. He hadn't seen that label since his police days. It was discontinued more than 10 years ago. Whoever had come into his house wasn't a random drifter. They were connected to the past. Later that night, Jack drove into town to speak with Sheriff Dan Mullins, now retired, the same man Harold Briggs had mentioned. Mullins lived in a trailer near the abandoned sawmill. The man who answered the door looked worn by time. His hair was white and thin, his beard unkempt, and his eyes a dull shade of gray that had seen too many regrets. His frame was still strong but bent slightly, the weight of old memories pressing him down. Jack introduced himself, explaining briefly about the bones, the journal, and the break-in. Mullins listened silently, his jaw tightening with each word. "You shouldn't be digging into that," he said finally, voice gravelly and low. "That case, it wasn't supposed to be reopened." Jack leaned forward. "Why? Because someone made it disappear?" Mullins looked away, staring into the dark outside his window. "Back then, there were rumors. Sarah said she was being followed. We searched the woods, found nothing. Then one night, the whole family vanished. I filed reports, but they were pulled before they reached the county. Orders came from above. Said it was a domestic matter." "Who gave those orders?" Jack pressed. Mullins hesitated, then sighed. "A man named Richard Hale. He worked for the development company that wanted to buy the Miller property back then. Rich, arrogant, the kind who always got what he wanted. When Sarah refused to sell, things turned ugly. Then she disappeared, and Hale left town." Jack's mind raced. A powerful man, a missing family, a buried cellar, it all connected? "You think Hale's still around?" Mullins rubbed his temples. "If he is, he's not the same man you'll find in old records. He changed his name, built something bigger. Some secrets grow roots, Turner. Be careful you don't get buried with them." Jack left the trailer feeling both anger and resolve. The night air was cold, filled with the distant cry of an owl. Rex sat in the passenger seat, eyes bright in the darkness. Jack placed the torn photograph on the dashboard beside him. "We're close, boy," he whispered. "Someone's trying real hard to stop us, which means we're finally on the right trail." The following morning came with a cold wind that cut through the valley. The clouds hung low over Silver Pines, pressing down on the trees until they seemed to bow under the weight of silence. Jack Turner sat at his kitchen table, the torn photograph spread out before him. He hadn't slept. The revelations from Dan Mullins kept echoing in his mind. Richard Hale, the land deal, the cover-up. He poured himself another cup of bitter coffee and glanced toward the small wooden box on the shelf. It had belonged to his late father, Henry Turner, a man whose memory was both a wound and a compass in Jack's life. Henry had been a police officer for 30 years, a man of tall, commanding presence with broad shoulders and a neatly trimmed mustache that gave him an air of quiet authority. His piercing blue eyes rarely softened, even at home, though there were moments, rare, brief, when he would let out a laugh that seemed to lighten the whole house. He had died 5 years ago, his heart failing in the middle of a snowstorm. Jack had kept his belongings sealed away, unable to face them. But now something told him that his father might have known more than anyone realized. He opened the box. Inside were neatly stacked reports, medals, and a leather-bound notebook with his father's initials embossed on the cover. Jack flipped through old case notes until a single yellowed file fell out, marked in faded ink. Miller disappearance. Preliminary findings. His pulse quickened. The document wasn't part of any official record he had ever seen. The first page was typewritten, the rest handwritten in his father's steady script. Investigated site at Silver Pines. Family missing, presumed dead. Evidence of forced entry and excavation near Western Woods. Suspicion. Involvement of contractors linked to Forest Road expansion project. The report ended abruptly with a line scrawled in ink darker than the rest. Order received to cease investigation. Threats made against family. Jack leaned back, his chest tightening. His father had been silenced, too. It explained the bitterness that had shadowed the man's final years. The long stares into his glass of bourbon. The silence at dinner. The way he had once muttered, "Justice has a price, son. Sometimes too high to pay." Rex barked softly near the back door, breaking Jack's thoughts. The dog's ears were perked, his nose pressed to the ground. "What is it, boy?" Jack followed him outside, the forest once again calling like an unspoken invitation. They walked along the edge of the property, where moss covered the stones and the fog curled around their legs. Rex led him straight toward the abandoned cabin they had found days earlier. The air there felt heavier, colder, as though the trees themselves remembered. Rex began digging near the base of the wall where they had found the photograph. Jack knelt beside him and used a small shovel to help. The soil was dense, layered with old roots, but soon the blade struck something hard. A metallic clang echoed faintly. They unearthed a small metal box, rusted at the edges but intact. Jack pried it open carefully. Inside was a cassette tape wrapped in plastic, labeled with neat handwriting. "For Emily, if you ever find this." His heart skipped. Emily, the missing daughter from the photograph. He returned home, cleaned the tape, and found his father's old cassette player in the garage. The machine whirred to life with a faint click. Static filled the room. Then a voice emerged, soft, trembling, unmistakably that of a woman. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "then I'm gone. My name is Sarah Miller. We tried to run, but he wouldn't let us. He wanted the land. He said it wasn't about money. It was about what's buried under it. Something old, something worth dying for." Her breath hitched, a small sob. "Thomas tried to protect us, but they took him first. Please, if someone finds this, tell my daughter Emily that her mother loved her. Tell her to stay away from the woods. The man in the trees isn't gone. He watches. He always watches." Jack's hands trembled as the tape ended in static. He stared at the player, unable to move. The room felt colder now, as though Sarah's ghost lingered just long enough to pass her burden to him. Rex nudged his leg, resting his head on Jack's knee. The dog's eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to share his grief. Jack whispered, "We'll find her, Rex. Emily deserves to know the truth, and Sarah deserves peace." That night, Jack sat on the porch, looking out at the forest. The wind carried faint echoes, branches creaking, leaves whispering like voices too old to be real. He thought of his father, of the file hidden for decades, and of Sarah's voice trapped in that cassette. The truth wasn't buried with time. It had been waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig it up. The moon broke through the clouds, silver light washing over the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a shape moved between the trunks, tall, silent, deliberate. Jack reached for his flashlight but stopped. He didn't need to chase shadows, not yet. The real hunt had just begun, and now, for the first time, he understood why his father had carried that unspoken guilt to his grave. Some secrets didn't fade. They demanded justice. He turned to Rex, who watched the tree line with quiet intensity. "Tomorrow," Jack said softly, "we find Emily." The morning broke clear for the first time in weeks. The fog that had cloaked Silver Pines was gone, revealing a thin layer of frost over the fields and roofs. Jack Turner stood beside his truck, the cassette tape still in his hand. The sun reflected faintly off the plastic, as if Sarah Miller's voice had left a trace of warmth behind. He had spent the night tracing old addresses, phone records, and archived reports. Finally, he found a lead. Emily Miller, age 35, living in Spokane, Washington. The daughter who had vanished into the system after her parents' disappearance. The drive took most of the day. The road wound through pine valleys and quiet towns where gas stations doubled as diners. Rex sat in the passenger seat, head resting on the window ledge, his amber eyes alert but calm. His fur had begun to gray around the muzzle, 6 years of loyalty etched into every movement. When they finally reached Spokane, the air was crisper, the sky wide and pale blue. Jack parked outside a small community center where Emily worked as a counselor. She stepped out to meet him after a brief phone call. Emily was a woman with long chestnut hair that fell to her shoulders in soft waves. Her face was gentle but tired, the kind of face that had learned how to smile through old pain. Her eyes were hazel, bright yet wary. She wore a cream-colored sweater, and her hands fidgeted with the hem as she looked at Jack. "You said you knew something about my mother," she asked quietly. Her voice trembled, but there was strength underneath. The strength of someone who had learned to survive by holding herself together. Jack nodded, removing his hat. "My name's Jack Turner. I live in your old house." That alone made her pale. He told her everything. The bones beneath the floor, the journal, the recording. When he played the cassette, her knees gave out, and she sat on the steps, tears spilling down her cheeks. Rex lay down beside her, placing his head gently against her leg, as if to comfort her. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his fur. "She was always afraid," Emily whispered. "I remember her telling me that the woods weren't safe. I thought she was just trying to keep me from wandering too far." Jack waited in silence until she steadied her breathing. "I found something else," he said, pulling out the torn photograph. Emily traced her mother's face with her thumb, then looked at the missing half. "That's my father," she said softly. "He used to take me to that cabin when he went hunting. But one night they argued. I remember hiding under the table. Then a man came to the door. Someone I didn't know. After that, everything went dark." Her memory broke off, like a film reel cut in half. Jack didn't press further. Instead, he said, "You should come back with me. There's something you need to see." They drove back to Silver Pines under the fading light. The forest seemed less menacing now, the mist replaced by a cold clarity that revealed every tree and shadow. When they reached the cabin, Emily froze. "I used to play here," she murmured. Jack led her behind the house, where the soil was freshly turned from the day before. Together they carried the metal box containing the cassette and photograph. Emily knelt, her hands trembling as she placed the box beneath an old pine tree. "Mom used to call this the peaceful place," she said through tears. "She'd bring me here to watch the sunset." Jack stood behind her, silent, while Rex lay nearby, his gaze following the golden line of the horizon. Emily whispered a few words, not a prayer, but a goodbye, and pressed her palm into the soil. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the branches, casting long shadows over the old house. They stayed there until dusk turned to night. The repaired windows of the house glowed faintly from the lantern Jack had left inside. It no longer looked haunted, just old, tired, but free. Emily sat beside Jack on the porch, her eyes reflecting the soft orange light. "Thank you," she said, "for giving her peace." Jack shook his head. "She did that herself. I just listened." Rex stirred, his ears twitching at a faint sound, the sigh of wind through the trees. It almost sounded like a voice, distant and gentle, carried by the forest. Emily looked toward the pines and smiled faintly. "She used to say the truth always finds its way home." Jack nodded. "Your mother was right." As the stars began to appear above Silver Pines, Jack felt the weight he had carried for years begin to lift. The house behind him no longer felt like a tomb. It was part of a story finally laid to rest, one of loss, courage, and a mother's love that had outlived death itself. Rex yawned and curled at Jack's feet, his tail thumping softly against the wood. Jack reached down, scratching behind his ears. "Time to rest, partner," he murmured. "We've done enough digging." The night settled over the valley, calm and clear, and as the wind moved through the pines, it carried a single whisper that only those who had listened long enough could hear. The truth always finds its way back. In the quiet stillness of Silver Pines, Jack's journey reminds us that even the darkest secrets cannot bury the truth forever. When all seemed lost, a small voice, Sarah's message of love for her daughter, rose from beneath the soil like light breaking through a storm. That is the miracle of faith. Even when the world tries to silence what is good and just, God's hand guides the truth home. Just as Jack followed the whispers of conscience, we too are called to listen, to believe that healing, forgiveness, and truth are not accidents, but divine threads woven by God Himself. In every broken home, every scarred heart, there is still hope waiting to be found. Sometimes it takes courage to dig it up. Sometimes it takes faith to see that even pain can be turned into purpose. God works through ordinary people, through you, through me, through anyone who dares to seek the truth and show compassion. What happened in that lonely house was not just the uncovering of a crime, but the rebirth of grace. The same light that freed Sarah's spirit can also touch your life, no matter how lost or cold your days feel. May He bring peace to your heart, clarity to your path, and remind you that miracles don't always come with thunder or angels. Sometimes they come as quiet courage, a loyal companion, or a stranger who decides to do what's right. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment sharing what moment moved you the most. Subscribe for more stories of faith, redemption, and the bond between people and the miracles around them. Share this video so that others may remember, Even in the coldest house, God's light can still find its way in. May God bless you and your loved ones.